See, the reason that I preface that with Theosophy and the other is that it goes into deeper teachings that have been put in place over time. So when it says esoteric studies there, as part of what the class is,
Mm-hmm.
there's been a lot of deep teachers over time, from Theosophy, Rudolf Steiner and his movement. All of those people have given a lot of information about what the nature of the universe is, how we connect to the universe, what ascended masters and deep spiritual teachers have over time. And the thing is, we really don't have 100% proof of what those deeper teachings are. We could even go back to Davis, correct? Well, all of these really deep teachers over time talk about the nature of the cosmos, how things came into being, a very deep spiritual philosophy. For me, part of the center of this comes back into another concept that I hold dear, and that is the proof of all these things is in the tasting. And what kind of use do we get from these deeper spiritual teachings? Over time, many people have misused these deep spiritual teachings. We could use the example of Adolf Hitler. A lot of people talked about how he was involved very heavy with Theosophical studies. His study about the different root races over time and the Aryan race did not necessarily end well, correct? And so we want to think about, when we're studying these things, speculative metaphysical philosophy. How do we use those deeper teachings? How do we come to personal empowerment with those deep teachings? And what use do we have for those in our lives? There are those from spiritualism that talk a lot about being attentive, independent, and autonomous, and do not want to go back into hierarchical, this group over this group. You can only approach the cosmos because of sort of thing that comes from organized religion. And so in spiritualism over time, there was a real pushback against some of that type of thinking. And yet I would advocate that there is use in looking around in the ash can. There are parts of these teachings that are really very valuable to us, and having a working knowledge of some of those deep teachers over time and being able to understand them, articulate some things about them, and understand that we can take the parts that are valuable to us and leave the rest. It is an a la carte thing. And anybody that speaks about those things, that says with absolute authority, this is the group, this is the theory. We didn't get a booklet that was dropped in our hand when we came from the cosmos saying, this is exactly how things are organized. And anything that helps us to understand those things better, even if it's just formulative, just right now, I think is valuable for us to study. And so I like browsing in those things. But then over time, I've read channeling from stuff that goes back to people in the 1930s. Gosh, way back in the day when we didn't have really large global travel, it used to be a big thing for people to bring in Venusian masters, people that came from Venus. You don't hear much from them anymore. It moved from there into we the Arcturians and the Pleiadians, because that was much more distant in our understanding. And as we continue to evolve as a species, we're going to continue to push those things out to make it more relevant and not as concrete to things that we understand. But getting an idea about how the universe works,
Mm-hmm.
how things are connected spiritually, what kind of realms are there. A working knowledge of those things is really valuable for a spiritual seeker. And working their way through the landmines associated with that, think of me as a guide. Just think of me as a guide. I'm there to say, these are some things that we gain from Theosophy. Here's some of the pratfalls that we gain from Theosophy. Here are some takeaways that I would have for you as a spiritual seeker. All of this is just aimed respectfully that people might have a roadmap. That's the bottom line.
And that is a more lecture formatted class then?
Correct. I will. I'm a big fan of guided meditation. I will have a prayer, of course, going in. I usually do. And I think that there would be at least a guided meditation. I never process with a group of people that we don't talk about what we experienced when we meditated together. So I think that there would be that element involved with that workshop as well. And that was an excellent question. Thank you. At the risk of saying something dicey about Theosophy, I will for just a second. I mentioned Hitler. There's that, of course. Anne Blavatsky, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, HPB, of her early theosophical fame, was busted more than once in a fraudulent, seance. For real. She was busted. And she would just knock a couple ashes off the end of her cigar and keep going. That was a strong Victorian woman. This is from the 1890s, early 1900s. That didn't bother her too much. So there's certainly controversy adjacent to those things. And yet, what might we glean from that? People can get real bogged down about the messenger and not really want to cut to the chase. I was talking to Elaine about this, and I don't think she'd mind my sharing this. We were talking about some things going on, and I brought an example from Barbara Marciniak, who did, the channeling of the Pleiadians in the 1980s and 90s, and people loved it. They ate it up like sliced bread. And a friend of mine used to have tapes from some of those earlier channeling sessions that became the books. We used to jokingly refer to those as letters from home. And we'd slap them on and listen to them and, get all geared up. And there was a section in there, and I want to share this with you because it's very timely to where we are right now. Think about this. This was the 80s or the 90s, right? There's going to come a time in the future where there'll be light-encoded filaments that will transmit information. This is before fiber optics were generally in use, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to be using that, and information can be disseminated that way through symbols and signs and numbers in a much broader way than what we're familiar with right now. And as things begin to progress in the future and the world begins to spin up, that things start to move at a more accelerated pace, people will begin to form on either side of the coin. They will either become more and more fossilized in the physical, or they will become more fossilized in the spiritual. And it will be as if we were living in two independent worlds at the same time. Aren't we living there right now?
Yes, it sounds just like it.
In a huge way.
Yeah.
And so in the center of all of these things, I don't have to say that I know for certain that Barbara Marciniak was introduced to this entity from the Pleiades and that it's 100% valid and that she's lived a 100% upright, chaste, and spiritual life. So we should either take everything that she has or reject it. I look to the center and I say, in the meat of this, is there a concept there that's valuable for me to explore spiritually so that I can conceptualize more of the larger frame of the cosmos and that it might assist me in my understanding?
Mm-hmm.
All of those things. If we plow through Davis, and sometimes having an interpreter helps there. If we plow through Swedenborg, sometimes if we have an interpreter helps there. If we plow through any of the deep spiritual teachers over time, it helps to have a guide. And it really helps for us to remember that we don't have to take everything lock, stock, and barrel. That we're looking to understand more. And this is speculative metaphysics. It's an area that's not absolutely defined and yet affects everything. And so we want to know about those things and we want to study those things. And so I think that that's important for us. And having a time to browse over some literature to understand more of the terrain, I think it's a valuable thing for people to study. It's well worth the time. And I think that you'll enjoy the meditation too. So I've done a few in my time. I think it'll be good. I think it'll be a good workshop.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So I appreciate the insight, and I guess we'll see you at the workshop.
You will. You will. Yeah, I'll be there. Oh, virtually, of course.
Yes, virtually, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.